Hi, everyone. This is Jillian with Court Junkie. Court Junkie is a true crime podcast that covers court cases and criminal trials using audio clips and interviews with people close to the cases. Court Junkie is available on Apple Podcasts and podcastone.com.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on the prosecutors, we conclude our look at the Pablo Velez case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my hermosa co-host,
Hermosa.
Alice. Hermosa.
Español. Muy bien.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you.
Which
Whoever
you
suggested
are
it. 'Cause
inside and out.
whatever. I was going to say Brett would never say that.
That was
But
Madison. That's not true.
Thanks, Madison. And way to go pronouncing that. That was muy hermoso. Hermosa.
You know, I'm not going to say Spanish is easy because no other language is easy for me, but Spanish is a little bit easier than some of the things people throw at me, like Dutch and Russian and Chinese and everything else. It's like, oh my goodness.
Those
I
are
don't
so
know how
funny
those
when
letters
you
make
say
those
them.
sounds.
I think everyone just
true.
wants. I bet you all these people have pools going. Like, what does a Russian accent sound like with a Southern accent?
And then they can find out.
They can
just
find
by
out.
coming here.
That's
So I do
right.
want to say today our episode with Allison Sweeney came out, which was awesome. Thank you so much to her for doing it. I'm not exactly sure when this episode will air, but if you're listening to this, her latest movie on Hallmark Mystery, Reality Bites, a Hannah Swenson mystery, is coming out Thursday, February 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So I hope you'll watch that. We'll probably check it out. We will certainly check it out as well. The prosecutor, I forget his name, it's like Burt Rowley or something. He's very attractive.
Very close to Brett.
Brilliant. Brilliant. It's just amazing. So definitely watch that. But, you know, as much fun as that was, Alice, I missed you. I hope next time that Allison comes on the show, you can be on the show as well.
I hope so as well. Thank you, Allison, for filling in for me while I was out with my baby. And it was a great episode. I don't know. I may be replaced soon.
Never, Alice. Never.
Well, I am glad to be back, and especially glad to be talking about a case that truly I don't find it that confusing, but I know that there are a lot of people at play in the Pablo Velez case, most who have nothing to do with Pablo, which is, I think, why it's so confusing. And I'm glad to talk about it with you.
Yeah, and so we've done 2 episodes on this. I hope you guys are starting to understand what happened that night, but just to give you sort of, once again, a little bit of a rundown, because I know it's a little confusing, as these kind of things can be. Basically, you have these 2 groups of people. You have this individual, Adrian Payan. He gets beaten up by Jason Woolley, Richard Shorty Cisneros, and Ron Strandberg at a bar. The next night, he basically gets called back to the bar by his girlfriend, Claudia, who says, hey, the guys who beat you up are here. And he's smart enough to know 3-on-1 didn't work out last time, so he brings a few friends. So now it's Adrian, it's Esteban Rodriguez, and it's Emerson Bajorquez. These 3 guys show up, but unfortunately, what was a fight the night before becomes a shootout this night. There are at least 3 people shooting. 1 person is killed, and eventually Pablo Velez is identified by that girlfriend, Claudia, as one of the shooters. And we've been going through whether or not Pablo was actually involved. And let's talk about the forensics in this case. Remember, we already know there are 3 people who were involved in this incident before. So what are we looking at here? Well, as you might expect, there were 3 clusters of bullets. One was a 9mm casing, And this was actually the shot fired by Jason Woolley. Remember, he actually fires a gun into the ground as this confrontation is beginning. And that's what started the shooting from everyone else. There were also 223 casings. I think this is 5.56. If you guys are into guns, the NATO round, sort of what you see often in rifles, sort of long rifles, you would expect that. We see a group of these casings, and in fact, that was fired by the blue-shirted shooter in the north of the parking lot. And this is the individual that Claudia will later identify as Pablo. And there's a cluster of .40 caliber pistol rounds. These were most likely fired by Ron Strandberg because they match his gun and thereby parked cars on the south end of the parking lot. So basically, you've got this situation where there are people in 3 different areas of this bar. We talked about this before. Was this an ambush? It kind of feels like it was, because you have people at different positions sort of lined up to be shooting into the interior of this area. You also had some .40 caliber bullets that were on the ground that appeared to be as if someone was chasing Adrian. Remember, Adrian's the one who got beaten up, and sort of firing at him as he's running away. So you've got Ron Strandberg, a gun that matches him. You have Jason, who is firing his gun into the ground, right? So we know those 2 people are 2 of the shooters. And the question is, was there a third, and who was the third? Now, Claudia saw 2 shooters. She actually believed that Jason fired more than 1 shot into the ground and then chased Adrian, continuing to fire at him. This didn't happen because Jason, we know, was firing a 9mm. So it seems much more likely is that it was someone else. Now, one possibility could be that Woolley fired the 9mm from a .40 caliber pistol. This is something people have suggested, and continued firing these .40 calibers. This fits Claudia's memory and would fit the distribution of the rounds. This would be a very strange thing to do. It is theoretically possible to fire a 9mm bullet from a .40 caliber gun, but it's not something you'd recommend to anyone. It can damage the gun in the way that blows up and kills you. So you don't normally want to do that. It's a very strange thing to do. There's no reason to think he would do that. And since we have someone who's firing .40 caliber rounds, it's much more likely that Jason Woolley, he fires that 1 bullet into the ground. Maybe he chased after Adrian, but he wasn't shooting, and Ron was the one who was shooting, and that's why we see all these .40 caliber rounds. But the real question that we're concerned with here is who was shooting the 223? Who was the one with that third weapon? The blue-shirted individual, and it either is Shorty Cisneros or Pablo Velez Jr. The prosecution would eventually say it was Pablo who had shown up after working and apparently engaged in this shootout. And I guess Shorty Cisneros, he was there, but he was just the one person who wasn't shooting.
I'm not gonna lie, that made me a little bit confused. No, and another thing about the theory about the 9mm bullet coming out of the .40 caliber gun is that's probably unlikely too, because we have, despite the whole it could blow up in your face and kill you if you put a 9mm in there, is that the way the clustering of the bullets are found, right? The cluster suggests, and look, why, I don't know. If this were an ambush, what is the purpose of Jason Woolley shooting 1 bullet into the ground? To set off a shootout where nobody knows whose bullets kills whom. But all eyes are on the one shooter, which is Jason, and you want him to be clean as a whistle. So it doesn't actually help his plan if he fires 1 shot into the ground, but then starts running after someone shooting them with their gun. Because I would think the purpose of the ambush is he sets off the domino effect to allow the shootings to happen, but he can have clean hands, so to speak. So that doesn't really work with the ambush theory.
And let me just say this, because it is confusing whenever we talk about guns and all those different rounds. The most important thing here is there are 3 separate types of bullets, which indicates 3 shooters. There were 3 people involved in the fight the night before. In order to believe that Pablo was one of the shooters, you have to believe that Pablo showed up to join the other 3 in what seems to be an ambush, but one of the original 3 doesn't have a gun. Pablo does, but one of the original 3, apparently Shorty Cisneros, doesn't have a gun, and Pablo, who wasn't even involved in the fight the night before, is the one who brings a gun and starts shooting. It would seem more likely, if you're calling in extra backup, that there would have been 4 guns because you want the most people shooting to ensure that you accomplish your objective.
Right. And so the reason these 3 episodes may seem a bit confusing is because essentially we're talking about 2 stories. We're talking about what happened at the club, and then we're also talking about, in conjunction, Pablo's timeline and whether those 2 fit together. So let's talk about Pablo's girlfriend. So at some point in July, Pablo did have an all-night conversation with his ex-girlfriend, Anel. Pablo would tell police this occurred the night of the shooting. Remember the timeline? He says that he got back from his long-haul driving, goes home, eats some Lucky Charms, and then drives to his girlfriend's house. And apparently he says that they had an all-night conversation, which would be a good alibi because then it would mean he is somewhere, not at the shooting. And in fact, Pablo would tell Anel he thought it was the same night. Now, Anel wasn't sure, so she went to her job and determined that the conversation would have occurred on a night she had the next day off, as she would want to sleep in. And she worked on the 16th, which is the day after the murder. Because of looking at the calendar and thinking about probably wanting to have an all-night conversation when she could sleep in, she then believes and concludes that the conversation Pablo remembers having occurred 2 weeks later, on the 29th, instead of on the 15th, the night of the shooting. And this is because she also believed that she'd gone to the doctor around when the conversation occurred. So it's not that she definitively remembers this is not the night of the shooting. She's looking at her calendar and piecing together when she thinks it happened. And she, based on kind of things in her calendar, she thinks it actually happened 2 weeks later. However, Anel also indicated that this conversation Pablo talks about occurred around a phone call she believed they'd had in late July. But the phone call she thinks this conversation is about actually happened on July 13th, which would be 2 days before the night of the shooting. So what happened here? Is Pablo confused about when this conversation happened? Is Anel? Was Pablo asking Anel to just make up an alibi for him?
And look, this is the problem with alibis. And we see this in every case that involves an alibi, is when you're relying on people's memories, everything gets confusing. And you see Anel doing what you want people to do when they're trying to remember. She's looking for sort of guideposts to hitch her memory to. So, if we'd done that, I would have done it on a night that I didn't have to go to work tomorrow. Now, she says that, and that makes sense in hindsight. Does that necessarily mean she was thinking that night when he showed up at her house? I don't know. Then there's the whole, it happened around a phone call. Well, that's the opposite of what she thinks, because she's saying this was late in the month, but that phone call happened right around when the conversation would have occurred. And so you're trying to figure this out. And the prosecution's obviously saying, look, this is him trying to cover up what happened. He is trying to build an alibi. But also recall this. What is actually happening here? At some point after this murder, Pablo is going to realize that he is a target of the investigation. At some point, the police are going to show up and start asking him about his cold car. And what is he going to do? What does any person do in that situation? They start thinking back. Man, what was I doing on that night? Right? And then he thinks he went over to her house. Now, whether he did or not, I don't think that's something that was nefarious that he would say that. We know this was at least a few weeks later. In her telling, the conversation doesn't happen until July 29th, right? So he's trying to remember back to a night, if he didn't do it, which was completely innocuous for him, right? It wouldn't have been a big deal. It was just another night that he got home from his trucking thing, and then he went over to her house, and they had this conversation. So I don't think you can say he's trying to create an alibi here, even if he's wrong. And certainly her memory is not that great either. And look, she's his ex-girlfriend. She's not happy with him. In the post-conviction stuff, there was obviously a lot of ineffective assistance of counsel claims. And Pablo had actually told his attorney, look, you really need to work on this witness because they're going to call her and she's mad at me. They had broken up for a reason, and you probably won't be surprised to find out it was because Pablo had cheated on her, right? And now he's trying to get her back, but she's not interested in it. So she's very angry. She's not inclined to help him, and she doesn't help him. But we see this all the time with these alibis. Alibis are a mirror. You see in them whatever you want to see, right? Like if you're somebody who wants to believe somebody's innocent, you'll look at the alibi and you'll say, rock solid. And if you want to believe someone's guilty, you'll look at the alibi and say, there's so many holes in that, there's no way. And we see this in every case with alibis, and it happened here. But here, it was another thing that helped the jury get to guilty. Because it made it seem like he was trying to fabricate an alibi to get off from this crime. And obviously, her testimony, I think, was pretty damning to him. Now, let's talk a little bit about his background. Pablo, he was a hardworking guy. He had no criminal record, but he was not an angel. He had been to the perfect rack, and probably evident to you now, that was a gang hangout. There were a lot of different gangs. There were a lot of fights, shootouts. I mean, this was just something that happened at the perfect rack, and he'd been there a couple times at least. His dad may have been a cocaine dealer. In fact, the only arrest on Pablo's record, he had been at his father's house when there was some sort of big drug bust of his father, and he was temporarily arrested. He was released, didn't have anything to do with it, but nevertheless, he has this close connection to his father. And I will tell you, I am certain that law enforcement viewed Pablo as sort of someone who is probably engaged in all sorts of criminal activity, but we haven't been able to get him yet. You know, he's Pablo Velez Jr., so Pablo Velez Sr., big drug trafficker. What are the chances Pablo's not involved, right? So this is something that would have automatically put him on the radar. Now, he had sold his car to Ron Strandberg, who is, once again, a member of a gang and sort of a violent person, but he'd never transferred the deeds. And he was apparently willing to report the car stolen without verifying that it was actually stolen. And then when Ron was like, never mind, you know, he didn't think anything of that. He did have a gun. It was legally owned. It wasn't the gun used in the shooting. And as we said, you know, he'd been cheating on his girlfriend. He was out on the town, right? In other words, he's just the kind of person you would expect would get tagged in a crime like this, a crime that he didn't actually commit. He sort of fits the mold for what you would expect to see if you're looking for an actually innocent person. Guys, let's be honest. Raising a family today feels like navigating a maze of unhealthy options. Between hidden sugars, artificial ingredients, misleading labels, it's hard to know what's actually good for our kids. That's why I love Thrive Market. It's like having a personal guide to healthier living for my entire family. And you know how it is. I have 2 kids. I got another one on the way. Half the time, they are not interested in eating anything that I've got. Unless it tastes good, they're not going to eat it. But the great thing about Thrive Market is it makes it simple to find trusted, family-friendly brands. The kind of brands your family's going to like, the kind of brands your kids are going to want to eat. And you can do it without spending hours in the grocery store. From snacks and school lunches to pantry staples, everything they offer is 100% non-GMO. And with their on-site filters, you can shop based on what matters most to your family. Low sugar, gluten-free, organic, or high-protein options, all just a click away. I know the last time that I was on Thrive Market, I was really interested in finding things that were paleo, things that were keto, things that had fewer ingredients, just less filler. And I was able to do that on Thrive, and it is so easy to find food that fits your desires. And one feature we cannot live without, the Healthy Swap scanner in the Thrive Market app. Here's how it works. You can scan a product you're used to buying, and it instantly recommends cleaner, healthier alternatives for my family. This has been a game changer. You can take that sugar-packed snack, scan it, and you will get something like Simple Mills crackers, which are fantastic, by the way. Chomp's beef sticks, love them. You got to check it out. I love Thrive, and I love shopping on it. Ready for a junk-free start to 2025? Head to thrivemarket.com/prosecutors and get 30% off your first order, plus a free $60 gift. That's Thrive, THRIVE, market.com/prosecutors. thrivemarket.com/prosecutors. And let me know what you get. I'd love to hear from you. Guys, if you follow the podcast, you know we talk about our kids all the time. Alice has 4. I have 2 with a 3rd on the way. And one thing we care about is keeping our kids healthy. You know, when I was growing up, we took vitamins. But the fact of the matter is, most kids' vitamins, they're kind of just a lot of junk. They're kind of candy in disguise. They're filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids, frankly, should not eat. And that's why Haya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Haya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk. Yet it tastes great, and is perfect for picky eaters. Haya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diet. If you're anything like me, you know half the time it seems like your kids only want to eat one thing, and they're not getting all the nutrients they need. Haya can step in with things like vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, teeth, bones, and more. It is designed for kids 2 and up and sent straight to your door so parents have one less thing to worry about. And probably the most important thing of all, your kids are going to love it. Mine do, and they won't eat everything. And it's like anything else. If they won't eat it, it doesn't matter how healthy it is. But they're going to love Haya. You can count on it. We've worked out a special deal with Haya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hayahealth.com/prosecute. This deal is not available on the regular website. Go to HIYAHEALTH, hayahealth.com/prosecute, and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults.
Here's the trouble with kind of not having clean hands in general, right? The reason he probably didn't question his friend on these things is he is around a gang hangout. Things like this happen probably all the time that don't involve someone getting killed, of course, something less, I guess, damaging than that. But they probably do things like this to help each other out with the law, not uncommonly. And so it's just another thing that you would do for a friend or a brother in your gang. And not knowing that you're essentially now the target of a murder investigation. So let's talk about Pablo's testimony then. Because Pablo testified in this case, and we've talked about you can always assert the fifth. You don't have to testify on your own behalf. And there's a jury instruction that says if the defendant doesn't testify, you can't hold it against them. There are lots of strategic reasons for the defense not to put up their client on the stand. For one, they may not be likable to the jury, right? Especially if you have someone who's not someone who sings in the church choir or is a sweet old grandma. If you have someone who may have cheated on their girlfriend or may hang out at the perfect rack, may have things that are just not very likable to a jury, that could be bad. You open them up to cross-examination, those sorts of things. But Pablo does choose to testify in this case. And you might wonder why, as there hasn't been any evidence that his testimony would need to rebut. In fact, it's pretty thin what the prosecution has in placing him even at the shooting. And here's the thing, Pablo never intended to testify. So what happened? Pablo had a number of witnesses who were going to testify on his behalf, and they were all present the final day of the state's case. At some point, Pablo's attorney, Mr. McLean, told them that they could all go home. But then the state finished their case more quickly than they expected. And McLean explained to the judge what happened, that he'd sent everyone home so as not to waste their time. And he asked for a recess. But we have talked about this before. You can't always time a trial. And the judge wants expediency in their trials. And the judge did in this case what happens in literally every trial that Brett and I have tried together. The judge said, call your next witness. It's your turn. That's it. This happens. This is why there's so much waiting around if you're a witness in a trial, because you don't know when this will happen. So he's like, look, I sent everyone home. I didn't know the state was going to finish as quickly as they did. Can we just have a recess until tomorrow? And you have to ask for a recess because otherwise the trial continues. You don't take breaks in trials. And the judge basically blinks and says, no, call your next witness. And if you don't call another witness, then you are forced to rest the case. And so the only person there, because all the witnesses were sent home, was his client, Pablo. And so with no prep or expectation he would need to testify, McLean called Pablo to the stand. This is like worst case scenario, but the other scenario would be that they would be forced to rest their case, closing arguments, submit to the jury. And now if we look back and just read a cold transcript of Pablo's testimony, the testimony actually went fine. It doesn't seem like the prosecution landed many blows, but of course, we know that a cold transcript doesn't tell the whole story, and the jury isn't reading a cold transcript. They're seeing a live Pablo on the stand, seeing every twitch of the eye, every nervous jitter, and the way he responds to cross-examination, to direct testimony. And it is very different to hear that testimony in person than reading that transcript.
And from reading the briefs, some of the briefs, this is obviously something that's raised in the ineffective assistance of counsel aspect of this case. Pablo essentially says that, he wasn't expecting to testify. He wasn't ready to testify. And it was a difficult process because he'd never testified before. He's getting asked his questions. Sometimes he's getting confused. He's trying to figure out exactly what he's being asked. And that kind of thing makes you look like you're maybe making things up or holding things back, or you don't answer the question, right? Like all that sort of stuff. Because, as Alice said, and as we've mentioned many times, one of the things the jury is doing that is very difficult to account for in a podcast is looking at the person testifying, reading their behavior, and making a judgment about whether or not that person is telling them the truth. It's a very human thing that we do every day, and it's something juries do. Are you telling me the truth or not? And that's hard to reflect in a cold transcript, but you really, for that reason, want to prep your witnesses. You want to prep all of them, but especially your client, your defendant. He's going to testify. He needs to be ready. He needs to be ready. He needs to know exactly what you're going to ask him. So at least his direct is good. Cross-examination is what it is, but at least on direct, you want him to be confident, strong, answering the questions directly and clearly. And Pablo had no opportunity for that. So this is a real sort of bad moment for him in the trial. And particularly in a case where there's not a lot of evidence against him, as we've said before, and as a lot of appellate courts will say, juries can make a decision that you're guilty if you testify based solely on that. They listened to you testify. They listened to you say you didn't do it, and they didn't believe you. And that was enough for them. So this was bad. I mean, this was a huge mistake. And frankly, there was some good testimony from those witnesses who came back the next day and testified. It wasn't worth it. If you got to rest, you got to rest. He would have been better off doing that.
And we've talked about this exact procedural situation many a times. And to see it really play out, I mean, this judge is not unreasonable in that we have faced this with every single judge we've appeared before as well. And it's just it was a tactical error, a real tactical error here.
I can't remember which trial we were watching, but there was some trial where it seemed like this is exactly what was happening. Like we were either watching a trial or
there were like nonsense
witness.
questions, and it was just like
and it just went on, and you're like, what is going on here?
Was it Murdaugh?
It was either Murdaugh. Maybe it was Karen Reed. It was one. I can't remember.
No.
But we talked
You're right.
about
it was
this.
Karen Reed because it was like really confusing questions. It was
actually,
was
it might have been Richard Allen. I'm not sure. It was one of those. It was one of those.
Maybe it was Richard
I
Allen.
think it might have been Richard Allen.
Because it was questions like, what's your favorite color? Like it was a filibuster, right? We called it a filibuster,
exactly. It was a filibuster
testimony.
Mm-hmm. And I think the reason was they didn't have another witness ready. And so they needed to get to the end because they probably figured if it was Richard Allen, that Judge Gold was the kind of judge who would say, call your next witness, arrest your case. And this is one of those things we talk about. People on Twitter and everything else just have no conception of how judges really are. Like the things that judges do and can do and are perfectly legal would make the average person on Twitter think there's a conspiracy here, how awful this judge is. And this judge in particular was very short with the defense. I mean, this was a judge who did not, I don't think he or she, I think it was a he, did not like the defense attorney and thought the defense attorney was not a very good lawyer. It's evident from the transcript. And I think that's why this happened. And it was perfectly within the judge's purview as the person who controls the trial to tell him this. Call your next witness, arrest your case. We're not recessing. And that's what happened. So let's talk about Mario Superman Sosa. So this is one of those things that came out many years later that you see in a lot of these cases. Apparently, there was a man named Mario Sosa who was interviewed by the police about the shooting. Mario Superman Sosa identified Ronald Strandberg and Richard Shorty Cisneros as the shooters. But Sosa told the police that he would not testify because he knew if he did testify, his family would be killed. Now that should not be surprising to anyone. Remember, these people are members of a gang. They take this very seriously to the point that the victim, we talked about this last week, the victim, when he testified, lied on the stand about what had happened, lied on the stand about who did it, and later admitted to that because he had survived that shooting. He didn't want to get shot again. So this person, he says, look, this is who did it, but I'm not going to testify. So Officer King was one of the investigators on this case, and at trial, he was asked if anyone had identified other shooters during the investigation, and he said no. But in his notebook, he wrote the following notes. Ron driving gold Cadillac. Possibly Ron shot Emerson. A source wrote a letter documenting everything and hid it. If anything happens, the letter will be mailed in. Shorty has everyone scared. So this is in this officer's notebook. The officer who testified, the officer who said never happened, didn't talk to anybody who had any other suspects, and you'll all be shocked to know this evidence was never turned over to the defense, however incompetent they are. And I will just tell you, reading this, I'm very surprised that this has not led to a vacation of this conviction and new trial. I mean, this is very clearly, this is actually Brady material.
This
right?
is Brady material, correct.
So we've seen, you think about the so-called Brady material in the Adnan Syed case, where somebody's wife calls and tells the prosecutor something the prosecutor told the defense attorney, who then told her husband, and then he told her. So it's like this circle of information that isn't actually anything. And that's called Brady material that we need a new trial for. This is damning Brady material. Someone should be prosecuted, sued. Withholding this kind of information is astonishing to me, particularly because it is so believable. The police know this. They know that this kind of stuff happens. They know that these kind of threats are made. And it's remarkable to me that they would have this information and continue down the path they went anyway. And the fact that they didn't turn it over, to me, is a pretty straightforward, clear, easy violation. But to this point, it has not led to any kind of relief for Pablo. And I think the reason probably is, as we've talked about before, it is really hard to make out a Brady claim because it's a balancing thing. You have to show that this new evidence was so powerful that if known, would have overcome what you had. And I'm not exactly sure what happened here, just because a lot of the court opinions are not available. They're not published, so it's hard to find them. But if I had to imagine, when this was presented, I assume what the court said was you had a positive identification of Pablo by someone who was there, the gold Cadillac, which was in his name, he testified, and the jury was entitled to disbelieve him. This person, even though they said this stuff that was helpful to Pablo, also said they would not testify. So how valuable is it really to the defense? Like, these are the kind of arguments that the state would have made for why it's not Brady material. But I'll just say this. There's the legal argument and there's sort of your duty. And we've talked about this a lot. That legal argument may be 100% accurate. But I go back to when we talked to Arlinda about the whole Baldwin trial. These prosecutors and these police officers also have just an independent responsibility not to prosecute the wrong guy. And I feel like you have somebody come in and tell you this, it should really give you pause about continuing that prosecution.
So the defense submits additional affidavits on post-conviction appeals to tell their side of the story. And this is some really interesting stuff. So affidavits are obviously sworn testimonies, but in writing. And they do have a different role, though. You can understand why someone testifies at trial, and then they submit an affidavit later on that may change their trial testimony, how problematic that can be, because what could have made them change it? Well, here we have Claudia, who was obviously she's the one who identified Pablo in the lineup. Remember, she's the one who followed the gold Cadillac, remembered the license plate number, wrote it down in her Bible, that whole thing. Now, in her affidavit, Claudia explained that during Jason Woolley's trial, she had testified, and a man was sitting behind Jason taking notes. Now, Claudia immediately recognized that that man was the blue-shirted shooter, the one that she had originally identified as Pablo. And she assumed it was the same man she'd picked out in the photo lineup. But when she shows up at Pablo's trial and sees Pablo Velez for the first time, she's immediately sure that's not the same guy. She finds the ADA on the case, Eileen Bogar, and tells her Pablo is not the guy. That is not the blue-shirted shooter. That is not the person I meant to pick out in the photo lineup. And she tells her, and this is where it's disturbing in her affidavit, she says that the district attorney tells her it's too late to change her story and that she should just answer the questions with whatever she told the police originally. And, may not be a surprise to you guys at this point, the man taking notes during Jason's trial, Richard Shorty Cisneros. By the way, that's not true. You're allowed to change your testimony anytime, especially if you think it's not the truth. So I don't know if the district attorney really said that and if Claudia really as forcefully told her, I got it wrong. People tend to be more black and white in their affidavits. I don't know the actual conversation. So before we pile on the ADA, it's possible the conversation happened where it was a little bit less black and white as this. You can imagine something like, I don't know, I'm getting real nervous. How do I know this is the right guy? I don't know. I don't even know what it is, what's up anymore. I don't know that I want to testify. I don't know if it's him anymore. And then you can imagine the ADA being like, everyone gets nerves when they get on the stand. So remember what you told the police. You were sure of it. We went through it many times. You didn't misremember anything, right? You don't have to be worried. These people are not judging you. It's not about you. You can imagine that conversation. That's in the best light possible. But if it happens as Claudia says, you can imagine that's very bad. Because if she says, this is not the truth, I now realize the error I made. I am sure that's not the same person. And an attorney is telling her, doesn't matter. Don't change your testimony. That obviously would be problematic. You can always change your testimony, especially when you're under oath.
And this is the point where typically my critics would say, I now am going to make excuses for the prosecutor or the police. Because ordinarily, what I would do is sort of what Alice did. I think it's really important when we talk about these cases. It is so easy to demonize people. Think about all those cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women where we're dealing with the RCMP. It would just be really easy just to be like, look, the RCMP's evil, and they're just a bunch of corrupt jerks, and they should be disbanded, right? That'd be really easy to do. I think much more effective and much more, if you want to actually have constructive change, try and figure out why these things happened and why these people did what they did and see if you can fix it. Could be things like lack of resources, that kind of thing. I think that's very important. And I think Alice just made a really good point. It's very easy in affidavits to be very black and white. However, in this case, I think there is reason to believe this is exactly what happened. You see recantations all the time, right? And oftentimes they are absolute crap to the point that the courts don't really take recantations seriously because it's so easy. I mean, 20 years ago, you testified the guy did it. Then you have some advocate come along and say, oh, it's been 20 years, so the perjury statute of limitations has passed. So now if you say he didn't do it, you can get him out of jail and there'd be no consequences. And then all of a sudden they recant, right? And is that a real recantation or is it a false recantation? You can have false recantations just like you can have false confessions. However, in this case, number one, Claudia's recantation is immediate. Yes, we have this affidavit, but remember, when she testifies on the stand, she doesn't testify it was Pablo. She is testifying consistent with what she says in her affidavit. And the other thing that happened that makes me think she did have this conversation, was Eileen Bogar surprised when she did that on the stand? No, she wasn't. As a matter of fact, she told the jury in openings that she expected that the witness would not actually identify Pablo. She had this conversation with Claudia. That's how she knew that. You wouldn't say that otherwise. And when she got up on the stand and said that, you would be shocked and you'd be fumbling all over yourself. She knew that she was going to say it wasn't Pablo. They had this conversation and she had prepared a backup plan on how to deal with it if she didn't just go along with what she'd said before. So I think this is absolutely what happened. I think this is the kind of recantation that has all sorts of support for it because it's not one that happened years later. It was one that happened at trial.
I think it gives it even more credence that she recognizes the man sitting behind Jason Woolley taking notes when she doesn't know who Cisneros is. So it's not like she's playing a game and trying to pin this on someone. She independently recognizes someone as opposed to just saying, oh, Pablo doesn't look like the person I remember. She can say that confidently because she has identified the actual person who she did see. So I think those two independent factors really support this type of recantation where it's not just a willy-nilly recantation because you were strong-armed by an attorney to submit a helpful affidavit.
So let's talk about Christopher Newby. Christopher Newby is actually a new witness, and he submitted an affidavit as well. He said in his affidavit that he knew Ron and Shorty and that they were the shooters that night. He said he also knew Pablo, but he did not see him at the perfect rack. He said in his affidavit that he never reached out to police because he knew the reputations of the shooters and he did not want to be viewed as a snitch. Now, this kind of affidavit, ordinarily, I would not give much credence to just because anybody can submit an affidavit 20 years later to help out a buddy and say, well, I was there, I saw it, sorry. But there's a couple things about it. Number one, it's consistent with what other people have said, with who the shooters would have been. And number two, his reason for not coming forward is consistent with other things we've heard, that witnesses were afraid. And remember, when we went through the timeline, we mentioned that incident after the perfect rack, where there was a shooting and some people got beaten up and there was no report ever made. But what were we told was happening there? Ron and Shorty were threatening witnesses who had been at the perfect rack. All of that fits with what Christopher Newby is saying. So even though in isolation his affidavit might not be all that convincing, I think given the other evidence in the case, it feels much more likely to be true than maybe what you would ordinarily see.
And Jason Woolley himself submits an affidavit. In his affidavit, he said that there were 3 shooters, 2 of whom were in the gold Cadillac. Jason refused to identify the 2 men in the Cadillac as he feared for his safety, something that we've heard of more than once in this case. And he would say that he knew, quote, without a doubt that Pablo wasn't one of them and had, quote, absolutely no involvement in the shootings. He said, Pablo doesn't deserve to be locked up. This is pretty big. Again, we know this is gang related, and so he's not willing to go so far as to name who the shooters are, but he's saying Pablo had nothing to do with it. Don't lock him up. Don't lock up this innocent man.
And yeah, and this is another one that in a different circumstance, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into. If this were just Jason Woolley and another gang member who's also in prison and he's willing to take the hit, you see that happen all the time. You see members of gangs will take the hit for other members of gangs, particularly higher ranked members of gangs, say they were the lone shooter when there were obviously 2 people. And a lot of times they'll get money on their books. They'll get respect in prison. When they get out, they're going to get all sorts of credit. You see that happen. That is obviously not the case here. There's no evidence that Pablo was even in the gang. In fact, he wasn't in the gang as far as we know. Jason has no reason to do this. And in fact, he's expressing the same fear that everyone else has expressed if he names the shooters, but he is willing to say it was not Pablo. Pablo didn't do it. And so I think this is also an affidavit that you give more credence to than you might in a different kind of case.
So obviously we started this saying we were looking at this because this is an assertion of actual innocence for Pablo, right? So let's look at the case for Pablo's innocence now that we've gone through the trial, the affidavits post-trial, and other aspects of the investigation. So Pablo's claims, and this seems supported by his ex-girlfriend, that he couldn't make the payments on the car, so he gave it to a friend, the friend being Ron Strandberg, and on the condition that Ron would take over making the payments. Now, this claim is further supported by Abraham Song, who is the owner of E-Race Performance. Now, Song testified on July 8th, 2004, that Ron Strandberg took a gold Cadillac DeVille registered in Pablo Velez's name in to have a stereo fitted. We talked about this earlier. I don't think they're that good friends that he's just having a stereo fitted for Pablo. He was doing this because he got the car from Pablo, and this was now his car. He was making his own, touches to it. He was putting in the stereo because this was now his car. So that's one. Claudia Beltran, she afterwards in that affidavit says it was Richard Shorty Cisneros was the one who she identified in the lineup, not Pablo Velez Jr. Also, in the typed up report of her initial photo identification, it says that Claudia said, quote, he looks like him. But in Detective King's handwritten notes, it also said that Claudia said that the blue shirted shooter had lighter hair. So even at the time where she made the quote unquote positive identification, there were doubts. It wasn't absolutely, that's the guy I saw. It was, these are the pictures you've given me. Typically, we like to have an answer for someone, and this is a closed universe. There's not an option where it says he's not here, even though that is always an option when you're given a photo lineup. But she's making the closest identification of the photos shown to her. And even then she's saying, this looks like him, but not exactly because the person I saw had lighter hair. Now, Claudia also, we know, had a number of Long Island iced teas the night of the shooting, which may have affected her recollection because she was probably a little bit inebriated, or maybe a lot inebriated. And when Claudia testified at Pablo's trial, she said she did not see the shooter in the courtroom and said that Pablo was heavier, taller, and had darker hair than the shooter, essentially saying, Pablo is not the shooter. And Claudia later said, as we know in the affidavit, that the prosecutor even knew this because Claudia told the prosecutor the morning of the trial that Pablo was not the blue-shirted shooter. In her affidavit, the prosecutor told Claudia it was too late and she should answer the questions with whatever she told the police originally. Another point for the case for Pablo's innocence. Nancy Almanza said that she did not see Pablo at the rack the evening of the shooting.
And in fact, there was no evidence that Pablo was at the perfect rack that evening. Other than Claudia, no one saw him there. The only other person who said Pablo was there was Adrian Payan, and he has since said he lied about that. And in fact, we knew at the time that he was lying because he said Pablo was there earlier than he physically could have been. The shooters in this case were likely, the three shooters were likely the three men who beat up Adrian Payan the night before: Jason Woolley, Ron Strandberg, and Shorty Cisneros. As we've said, Cisneros closely matches the description of the shooter Claudia initially gave to police. I feel like we could have done one episode 5 minutes long and just said, Claudia said the shooter was 5'4". Cisneros' nickname is Shorty, and not because he is tall. He was involved in the fight the night before. He is likely the shooter. This is not rocket science here, right? And we know, or we've heard, that Cisneros to this day is still putting money on Jason Woolley's account in prison, which, as I said earlier, is the kind of thing that happens in these gang-related issues when you're helping out a buddy who's making sure you're not going to prison. We know that the .40 caliber shell casings found at the Perfect Rack scene match the casings found during a June 2004 incident where Strandberg was shooting into the air. We know that Cisneros, Woolley, and Strandberg were out intimidating witnesses following the shooting. Guess who wasn't with them? Pablo. And one thing that's interesting about the bullets, we talked about that earlier, it seems this evidence didn't actually make it into trial. And it appears that this was a screw up by the defense because the issue wasn't even preserved. When this came up in the appeal, the appellate court said, look, interesting, but you didn't preserve it, so we're not even going to address it. Which, once again, his defense attorney was not the best. We know Jason Woolley, despite getting money on his account, has said that Pablo was not involved. As I said, Adrian Payan has recanted, now says Pablo wasn't even there. There were 51 calls the day before between Cisneros, Strandberg, and Woolley leading up to and just after the shooting. There were no calls involving Pablo. Probably because Pablo wasn't even involved in the fight the night before at the Perfect Rack, which was the trigger for the shooting. We know that. And Pablo was a truck driver. He didn't get back home until about 1 a.m., which is only about an hour before the shooting occurred. Now, could he have made it to the Perfect Rack? Yes, he could have. He was only about 11 minutes from his house, but it seems unlikely that he wasn't involved in the fight, the events leading up, got home, hadn't even gotten a phone call from anybody involved in the shooting, nevertheless decided to go to the Perfect Rack, shows up at the Perfect Rack, and just gets recruited into the shooting by this gang he's not even a part of. But that's what you'd have to believe happened here if you think Pablo was involved.
So that's the case for Pablo's innocence. And all of you guys are like, okay, do your thing, guys. Show us all the evidence now as to why he was rightfully convicted. Okay, so let's look at the evidence that's against Pablo. I'm going to give you a little bit of a teaser. It's not a lot. So what we have, Pablo never completed any paperwork transferring the lease of the gold Cadillac to Ron Strandberg. So it was compelling evidence because the gold Cadillac seen at the crime scene, seen driving away from the crime scene, housing at least one of the shooters, is registered to Pablo. That's pretty bad, right? And we talked about that's a great lead when you are investigating the case. The gold Cadillac tied to the shooting, I don't think anyone is disputing that here, is registered to Pablo. Pablo was identified as being a shooter at the photo lineup, and he did have that car title. He doesn't dispute it. Pablo looked as if he was trying to falsify an alibi at trial when he talked about, going to his girlfriend's house to have an all-night conversation, and he doesn't really have anyone else to back him up on it, certainly not his ex-girlfriend. And he was returning that evening from a week-long trip as a truck driver. He dropped his trainee LG Holmes off at a gas station at 12:40 a.m., and he then claimed to have gone to visit his ex-girlfriend Annelle, but she refuted this at trial. In other words, he doesn't really have an alibi that can be confirmed by anyone but himself, and we, of course, look at that suspiciously because you want to be self-serving, and if you have no independent verification for your alibi, it's not going to be that strong. But guys, that's basically it. Let's talk about the gold Cadillac. Makes complete sense that if he couldn't make payments on it, he gave it to someone. And that person, it's not just his word saying, oh yeah, he gave me the Cadillac. We have other third parties who are disinterested. The owner of like a car repair shop saying, yep, someone other than Pablo brought in this car and had the stereo installed. That is a step that is just consistent with someone working on their own car. We know that even though he was identified as the shooter, it wasn't really a rock solid identification even at the time. And the person who identified him recanted it and wasn't lying on the stand. She never identified him on the stand. But after the fact, she now says that the prosecutor told her not to change her story, essentially. Yet, even given that direction, she does not positively identify Pablo in the courtroom. And we talked about his potential alibi. Look, it doesn't look good when your name's on the car at the shooting and you have no one to back up your alibi. It makes sense that he's trying to explain that night away. And even if he misremembered when this conversation happened, there's no one who can back him up on any of this. And so it's his word against everyone else's, but this is a very thin case with respect to placing Pablo there, especially when you then bring in his cell phone pings and the possibility of him even being there. And then when you step away and look at why would he be there? How could he even know to be there? And what did they have against him? The end of the day, I would say not that much.
And, you know, I am always skeptical of these cases. We talked about why. You know, these cases become cause celebs and people bury the real evidence and they twist things and they try and convince you that everybody's innocent when most people are guilty. And so I just want to say to those of you out there who feel like that and often feel like everyone is guilty and disagrees with us and everyone we say is not guilty. The thing that I know you're probably thinking, and I just want to go through it one more time. What are the chances that Pablo's car was there that night and someone identified him as the shooter? That seems like too strong a coincidence to ignore, despite everything else we've said. But I want to remind you how that happened. Because his car was there, the police were already suspicious of him. Claudia gives a description of the shooter. Had his car not been there, based on that description, Pablo's picture would not have been in that lineup because he doesn't fit the description. They put his picture in the lineup despite the fact he did not fit her description because he is the owner of the Cadillac. This is not necessarily as nefarious as some people make it out to be because, as we've said, eyewitness accounts are really bad. And so, you know, maybe she's saying the guy's 5'4", or she's saying he's her height, but he's really 6 feet tall. Is that likely? No, it's not likely, but maybe. And so they went ahead and put the picture of the guy who owned the Cadillac that was there in there. There are 6 photos there. So just on pure chance, there's what? An 17% chance? 16% chance? 16.5% chance? Whatever. I don't do math. There's
5 is 20, so under 20%.
Yeah, under 20% chance, but a not insignificant chance that she's going to pick him randomly. And if you look at the picture of Shorty Cisneros, as we've put up and as we'll put on the website, next to him, they look very similar. And they didn't use a full body. They just used his face. So that coincidence, which seems so compelling at first, and I thought was compelling at first when I first looked at this case, I was like, when you look at it, when you put any amount of, you know, a microscope on it, all of a sudden it starts to fall apart. And I do think it falls apart in this case. And I'll just tell you, we've done a lot of these cases, several people that we think are innocent. Pablo is the most innocent of anyone we've done. Like, I see this case and it just seems to me this is so obviously a wrongful conviction. It's so obviously a situation where I think the police basically were like, hey, there were 3 shooters. We know one guy, the guy who shot into the ground. We know him absolutely. We think Ron Strandberg was there. We think Shorty Cisneros was there, but we can't prove it. But we got somebody saying Pablo was there. And Pablo's the son of a drug dealer. So by goodness, great opportunity to get a bad guy off the street. A little shaky, but that's fine. We'll let the jury decide, right? And they rolled with it, and he gets convicted, and they all went home feeling fine because he's a bad guy anyway. And that's how a wrongful conviction happens. And I think that's how this wrongful conviction happened here. I don't really have any doubt that Pablo is innocent. He currently, as we speak, is up for parole. I think his parole will be decided in April. And we can hope that he'll at least be paroled and released, but that's not going to change the fact that he spent 20 years in prison for a crime that I think it's evident he didn't commit. Alice, you want to tell me why I'm wrong?
No, you were right. You are absolutely right. It was a little bit shocking to see how thin the case was against him, especially when you saw Claudia's, I don't even want to call it recantation, because I think she was consistent from the beginning when she identified, quote unquote, him in the photo lineup. I think it was never a strong case, but you have these characters who are afraid to say things because this is not the only act of violence among these gangs. This will not be the last one. There's going to be a lot more. There's a lot of witness tampering outside of all of this. And when you have an easy person to pin it on, well, Pablo's name is on the gold Cadillac. Let's run with it. You don't even have to do that much witness tampering as a gang member to keep people quiet, right? The police naturally followed the lead. I agree that they should have investigated Pablo. He should have been suspect really number one to look into because of his name on the car that was seen, speeding away from the shooting. But if they did any sort of digging, they should not have stuck there. We always say leads are just that until proven not a viable lead in your case. No, I don't have any doubt that he's innocent. And it's a real travesty that we don't spend all our resources on these types of cases instead of the Adnan Syed case. That's the part that I think is horrible. Even us, we did 3 episodes on this. How many did we do on Adnan? Not because we liked Adnan, but because we had to refute all of the noise that was said out there about him. This is pretty cut and dry. And here's the thing. This isn't just based on feeling. This is based on the court record. This is based on affidavits. This is based on the briefings. Obviously, we weren't at the trials at the time, but read the transcripts. It's all there for you. And I think you would be hard-pressed to find any more. If you think we're leaving out some sort of key piece of evidence that pins this directly on Pablo, I think we laid it out very clearly for you what the evidence is against him. It's not nothing, but it falls apart pretty quickly upon any sort of digging. So if you think differently, I'd love to hear from it, because this is exactly the type of conversation we'd like to have about it. And I think that's productive conversation. But those 3, that's it.
I think Alice is right. It is sad we don't spend more time on it. And I'll say we received an email from Lisa Martinez, who is Pablo's advocate, 3 or 4 years ago about this case. And we get emails all the time from people who want us to do cases, people who just want to look into convictions, everything else, and put them on the list, move on. And at some point came back to this case and started looking at it and realized, wish we'd have done this one earlier, right? Not like it would make any difference us doing it. But nevertheless, I think it's always good to bring attention to these cases. I mentioned Lisa. Lisa is going to write an article for the True Crime Times, which is our Substack that we've talked about. Should be out as this episode's coming out, so check that to see that. She's been working on Pablo's case for a long time. As we always say, we want you guys to look at the primary documents. Those are harder to find in this case than some of the other ones. This case is not famous. As I said, a lot of the information is not out there. We'll link to a bunch of different stuff. There's a Facebook page that has a lot of information on this. We have access to a Google Drive that has basically everything in this case. I'm going to see whether or not that's something we can put up or not. People don't always like to do that, just make it public. But if it is, we'll put it up on the website or link to it on the website. Read it for yourself. Look for yourself and read the same testimony we talked about. The trial wasn't that long. You could read this trial in an afternoon. Look at it for yourself. See what you think. Read the affidavits. And I think you'll find that this is a case that is an actual wrongful conviction. And it's one that something needs to happen in this case. The least of which is Pablo needs to be paroled this year. And got a lot of people listening to the show in Texas, and I hope somebody who's listening in Texas has a little bit of influence, because if you're looking for a case where you can do actual justice and release someone who's actually not guilty and not be concerned about putting a murderer back on the streets, this is the case. Shopping for a new home can be a stressful experience, but that's where Homes.com comes in. Homes.com is home shopping the way it should be. Some might say Homes.com is the best home shopping site. Could it be because of the sleek, beautifully designed, ad-free user interface? A search without distracting ads? That's certainly better than the alternative. Or the most in-depth school info? Homes.com knows every parent wants the best for their kids, so they're the only one with school and district details and reviews from multiple sources, including niche. It may be Homes.com's super comprehensive and transparent agent directory. Or maybe it's that Homes.com is the only site that always directly connects you with a listing agent who knows the home best. Perhaps it's because Homes.com has the most in-depth neighborhood content of any home shopping site that's extensively researched to highlight the personality of each neighborhood. I wonder if it's the comprehensive search experience. Homes.com has 22 data visualization layers, 7 environmental layers, and allows you to search by commute and architectural factors. It's the home search you've been searching for. It could be any of those things that makes Homes.com the best home shopping site, but the only way for you to decide is to go to Homes.com right now and start looking for the perfect house for you. Homes.com. We've done your homework. You know, the eternal month of January has come to an end, and if you're like me, you probably didn't accomplish all of the healthy things you were seeking to do at the beginning of the year, and it can be rough. You're kind of feeling beat down. You want a new start, and I got to tell you, one thing that is perfect for that is Prolon. I have talked about it before. I have sung its praises. You should check it out. Prolon is a fasting replacement program. It works at the cellular level to rejuvenate you from the inside out, supporting enhanced skin appearance and fat loss, and improving energy and focus post-fast. Prolon's program takes the guesswork out and equips you with science-backed planning, making it a key tool for your health journey. Every now and then, we're reminded of these many healthy resolutions we've been making to lose weight, to exercise more, to eat better. But to go without a plan is a plan to fail. That's where Prolon's 5-day program comes in. It can help you stay focused and achieve real results. And I get it. You hear fasting and you think, I don't know if I can do that. That sounds terrible. That's exactly where I was. I've tried some of the gimmicks before and I wasn't looking forward to it. And I will tell you, my mind was changed. Almost immediately I started feeling better. And by the 5th day, I was feeling great. And that's because Prolon's fasting mimicking diet, it's revolutionary. It's plant-based. It nourishes your body while making your cells believe they're fasting, even though you're getting to eat the soups and the snacks that keep you going. Prolon can support healthy blood sugar, enhanced skin appearance, fat loss, and improved energy post-fast. It starts with that 5-day program. The snacks, the soups, the beverages, all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. No guesswork or planning required. You are going to like it, I promise you. You need to try it. I tried it, and it blew my mind. It's going to blow yours too. To help you kickstart a healthy plan that truly works, Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day nutrition program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors. All right. Well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to say about this case before we move on to the rest of the evening?
No, other than please listen to these 3 episodes. It's not that confusing. I think we laid it out at the very end. Like the bottom line, y'all, if you want to skip the first 2 episodes and just jump to the end, it's a thin case. Read it for yourself. You can do it very quickly. And then if you're affiliated with Innocence Project type kinds of representation, take this one up. Drop Scotty P. Scott Peterson doesn't need you. I'm sorry. That guy is guilty. Pick up this one. You can do a lot of good here.
And this is ironic, but I'm going to say it anyway. We've actually seen this recently. Those of you who follow some of the goings on in Washington, we're currently at the end of President Biden's term as we discuss this. And President Biden, in one of his last acts, commuted a bunch of death penalty sentences. Well, two of the people.
All of them, except for
all of them
two.
Except for like the people we really don't like. Yeah. No, there's
basically
no
everybody.
due process problem there, right? Like, you guys, you're cool. F you. Like, that's basically what he said. But anyway, two of the people that were commuted are refusing the commutation. And their argument is, well, they claim they're really innocent. I have no idea if they are not. Going to go to a limb and say they're probably not. But nevertheless, they are saying they're innocent. And they say, look, as long as I'm on death row, I have so much more access to resources because I'm on death row and people want to keep me from being executed. So they're willing to fight for my innocence. And we see this with the Innocence Project all the time. They might as well change their name to the Anti-Death Penalty Project, because right now what they're doing is everybody who's up for the death penalty, they just come out and say they're innocent. And it doesn't matter what the evidence is against them. You know, we have to go through a week of Facebook posts about how, Missouri is about to execute an innocent person. South Carolina is about to execute an innocent person. They literally did one in South Carolina where they claimed the guy was innocent, even though he had murdered his cellmate while in prison for the murder for which he was getting executed. It's like, he is not innocent. You may hate the death penalty. This is not the guy. But they will defend you if you're on death row. Pablo didn't get the death penalty. He got 30 years in prison. And so I feel like he has fallen through the cracks of the Innocence Project
claims.
and people who fight for that. Yeah. He's just fallen through the cracks because he didn't get the death penalty. Oh, he only got 30 years. He's just not worth the resources. And I have no doubt that the Texas Innocence Project right now is representing some of the worst people in the world simply because they're on death row. And they need to put some of their resources towards people like Pablo, because he is actually innocent. And I don't care if he's not going to get the death penalty. He should not be where he is. And it's just unfortunate that he doesn't. I mean, he's just forgotten. If it hadn't been for Lisa Martinez, we wouldn't even know about this case. But here we are. And like I said, hopefully in a couple months, we're going to have good news for all of you and a follow-up. But we're just going to have to see whether or not we do or not. Okay, that's enough ranting on my part. Alice, do you want to answer a question?
Let's do it.
This is from Sally Sue.
Hey, Sally Sue.
And Sally Sue wants to know, what did your respective spouses say when you said you were starting the Prosecutor's Podcast, and why did they call you crazy?
They didn't call us crazy when we started the Prosecutors. They may have called
us crazy. And then the second
question. Go ahead.
The second question, how did your respective spouses react when you said you were going to also do the prosecutor's legal briefs? And why did they accuse you of having a midlife crisis? And then they might have asked you, Alice, when you decided to do 2 additional podcasts, are you insane? Are you literally insane?
And then, Substacks and writing, op-eds. I mean, I think the proper question was, with the prosecutors, I think our spouses were like, good job. Glad you have some hobbies.
Yeah,
and they're
exactly.
so cute. Glad this takes an hour a week. When it turned into a full-time job. That's when they started calling us crazy. Without quitting our real full-time
Exactly.
jobs.
That's the problem. It's not so much that it's a full-time job. It's that we have 2 now, at least.
2 full-time jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Truthfully, our biggest supporters are obviously our spouses, who are heavily involved in all of this, but they take none of the glory. They're like always giving us ideas. They weigh in all the time. They're texting us in real time, telling us where we mess up when we record, which we greatly appreciate. So just know this is like an all family affair for both of us, but we're just the voices you hear.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of spouses, I have to ask Alice what I should call my 3rd podcast that I guess I have to do now, because in April we're having a baby. Number 3.
Yay!
Yay!
I'm so happy.
Little girl. We're all very excited. Mostly her older sister and brother cannot wait for her to arrive. So, it's going to be another interesting time. Why not? Now we're up to 7 children between us.
Surprise.
Surprise. But, what's really important, the podcast will be fine. It will continue as it always does. It will continue along.
We don't know how, but it will.
Yeah. And I obviously ask for all your prayers and support, because last time was a little bit of an ordeal, a lot of an ordeal, as Alice knows. So we're hoping for much smoother this time, but we'll see.
We're so excited.
Brave new world.
Because we seem less crazy when we travel around with our 4 kids if you at least have 3.
Yeah. We just took our 2 skiing, and I'm not sure how we're going to do 3, but we'll make it.
I don't know how you took them skiing. I'm really, really impressed. Like, just the gear alone. I don't know how you did it.
We had so many bags.
So I bet.
I was telling my wife, it used to be we just, we pack one bag and we go, get to the airport right before the plane took off. No biggie. Now I'm that dad who wants to get there like at least 3 hours early.
Because it takes that long to corral toddlers who are like, ooh, squirrel.
And now I am going to need to get a Odyssey now.
Oh my gosh. Can I go Odyssey shopping with you? It would be my greatest honor.
Well, my wife was test driving cars today. So if you want to go with her.
I'm texting her right now.
We need space.
I'm going to text her right now because I told you how I almost got a second. I didn't almost. I asked to get a second one. And that's where Mr. Alice drew the line. It's like, one Odyssey's enough. We're not getting 2.
You can never have too many Odysseys, What do you have now?
I have a Odyssey and a Highlander. You have the Grand Highlander.
The Hotlander? We call it a Hotlander?
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Why are Toyota and Honda not sponsoring us?
Yeah, I know, exactly. Where are you people? Come on. Like, Toyota that one time.
Well, I did send something to Mrs. Brett. She laughed, but I don't know if this is true. So if I'm spreading disinformation, I'm sorry. But apparently if you buy a Volvo, they give you the option to pick it up from, where are they based? Germany?
So you're the one who told her that. Switzerland?
I told her
Sweden?
that.
Sweden?
Sweden.
Yeah, she told me that. She's like, we can go to Sweden.
It's the same price. So you get to go on their dime. I probably just one person. For 3 days, test drive the car, and then they'll ship it to your country for you. So you get a free trip to Sweden. Again, I saw this on social media, so there's like a 30% truth to it probably. But I did send that to Mrs. Brett because I know she was potentially looking at a Volvo, which has some pretty cool, it's not a Odyssey.
I liked the Volvo.
Oh, but yeah, it has the fold down booster seat, right? I think that's awesome.
I can't think of anything to call it. A Hotvo doesn't work.
Well, we have a couple months to work on it.
Yeah, we'll work on it if we ended up with a Volvo.
Well, congratulations. I'm so happy for you guys. I'm a pusher of kids because, again, you seem less crazy when you travel with other people with more kids, and the only people I hang out with are Brett and his family. So I needed them to up their kid count so I wouldn't look as crazy.
The problem is I was going to name my daughter Brittany, but you stole the name. So what do I do now?
We could have 2 Brittany's.
We could have 2
Could she be Brittany the second? Is that how it works?
I don't know. That's a good question. Brittany the second.
Even if it's not in the same family, can it be Brittany the second? Brittany the higher? Brittany the blonde. Because mine is not, blonde. I don't know if yours is going to be blonde, but
medieval kings or something.
More likely yours is blonde than mine. So we have Brittany the darker, Brittany the lighter. Let's just go ahead and cancel ourselves right now.
Yeah, why not? Absolutely. Anyway. Well, thank you guys for all your support. Thank you, Alice, for all your support. We're all doing this together, right? We're just getting through it together. So
thanks for living life with us, guys. This is this is real.
Right, exactly.
We are in the midst of it. I can imagine maybe in 5 to 8 years, we look back and we're like, how the heck did we do it? But we are in the pits right now.
Your 5th podcast should be we just sit
around
and talk about
life. Podcast? What are you talking about?
That means you have to have a 5th child too.
I don't want a 5th podcast or a 5th child right now. So just, cool it.
Would you guys listen to our lifestyle podcast? We do all these ads for lifestyle podcasts, and they're like, I talk about my day with my friends and my love life and all this other stuff. And I'm like, who listens? Not, I'm sorry if that's one of the ads on this episode. It's like, who listens to this stuff? But apparently a lot of people.
I feel like we are just having children into our new podcast, which is about kids, like parents, right?
Yeah, there you go. We just transitioned into parenting podcast.
Oh, my goodness. Anyways, I really am so happy for you guys. That was a really great Little treat for our 45 best friends right here.
Yeah, exactly. You can feel free to tell everybody else too. It doesn't matter to me. I don't keep things secret like Alice does. It's fine.
It wasn't secret. If you saw me in person, it was definitely not a secret.
Well, I think when you had Brittany, didn't we go to an event with some listeners and you were very pregnant?
I was very
Brittany?
pregnant, and they were like, hi.
And they
It was
did a
one of
great
those
job keeping it a
pretending
secret.
like they didn't look below my eyeballs. And I was like,
Yeah.
you guys, I'm so pregnant.
Yeah.
I think I was like 8.5 months pregnant.
Yeah, you were very pregnant.
And it was at a bar.
It was at a bar. And you were drinking, so.
I wasn't drinking, but I
Like
was
a
at a
lot.
bar,
Yeah.
like 8 months pregnant.
Yeah. That's the secret is Alice drinks all the time. You guys just don't know it. I don't. It's always water. So, this is our.
That's what you don't know. Yeah. That's the behind the scenes.
That's the true conspiracy.
Man, I hope Huggies, I hope they actually sponsor us by sending
Huggies needs to
us
load up on
diapers
us.
because they can pay us in diapers and it would be about the same thing right now. Diapers
Yes.
are gold right now.
We need to let Podcast One know. Like, by the way, in case you didn't know, new
we
baby.
have a lot of
and
babies
another
up in
baby.
here.
A lot of babies. We got you, baby. We need more.
We got you, baby. we
More
got you,
diapers.
babies.
Babies.
So many babies. Prosecute parenting. I like that.
Prosa parenting.
Prosa parenting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true, right? Because, there would be a lot of anecdotes because I'm already working on them. My oldest is not that old, but he's in first grade. But I try to use my, scare tactics on him and his friends all the time. They'll be like, blah, blah, blah. Well, you'll go to jail. And I was like, you know who actually gets put to jail by me? Yeah. And they're like, you're kind of scary.
My kids are all about putting people in jail now. That's like their big thing.
Yeah.
They put me in
Unfortunately,
jail
the
earlier
prosecutor
today.
side really rubs off.
Yeah.
Anyways.
All right.
So
well, this is all fodder for podcast number 3, Prosa parenting.
Prosa parenting.
The Prosa parenters.
We're kidding, guys. We're so tired. We're not kidding about the baby, kidding about the third podcast.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe.
either way, we're going to do another show next week. I have no idea what it's going to be about. Couldn't tell you. Haven't even thought about it.
Someone go commit a crime. We'll do
We'll
it.
figure it out. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for following on this. Keep Pablo in your prayers too as he goes through this process of getting parole. We will let you know if we hear anything about that. All right, Alice. Well, do you have anything else you want to add? I assume no, but I'll let you say whatever you want.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, we will be back next week with a mystery. Just not sure what it is. In fact, it's a mystery even to us. But until then, I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are the prosecutors. Yeah, I'm drinking water instead.
Sorry.
Next week, I'm going to miss out on some stuff.
Oh,
But it's
man.
fine.
Yeah, you're really going to carry dry January into vacation?
I am. Well, I started on vacation because I don't like to drink when I'm skiing. Which I know is
Also,
weird for a
it's
lot of
not
people.
fun to
'cause
do it
people
when
like to
you're with
drink.
your kids.
Well, that's true. It's never stopped me before. But I don't know about other people. But if I lived at altitude, I'd weigh 150 pounds because I can't eat. I don't like to drink. The only thing I want to do is drink
And
water
everything
and
takes
Gatorade.
extra effort.
Yeah.
So, I'd be
I don't
working out
want
all the time.
anything. Yeah.
really
For
is.
me.
I'm, more power to you people who who are all about the, what is it, après skiing.
Yeah.
It's like all about what's after. Go into the bar, go into the lodge and
Maybe
drinking.
a smoothie. I mean, a smoothie.
Exactly. I mean,
a s'more.
Dude, I just chug Gatorade the whole time.
At Pluto TV, we're celebrating Black History Month with our curated collection of Black content, all streaming for free. Find groundbreaking films, including Selma, Django Unchained, Ali, and Coach Carter.
You have an incredible gift up here.
Gripping series like Power and The Game, next-level comedies, music video channels, and more. Brilliant Black entertainment, intentionally curated and all free. This month and always on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.